There we go. Give that a shot. The YouTube one, if you are watching this on YouTube, there it goes. Hello, there it is. All right. So I'll have to upload the VOD later. Thank you, Catherine, for letting me know. We have a fan on the YouTube channel, so that's fantastic. Thank you, Catherine, for that. Yeah, we'll upload the full VOD. We've only missed a few things, so appreciate that. So for me, yeah, I'm a bit self-indulgent. We have architecture reviews. We also have when product people come in, there is usually somebody from the security team involved in the initial discussions of what a product is. Um, I don't know, Jarrod, if you actually are involved in that process coming from a consultancy. I mean, at what point do you come into the engagement or the company? Are you brought in at the beginning? Are you brought in after, say, most devices have a anywhere between 18-month development timeline? So are you brought in like month 16 where it's like really hard to make changes once you go, oh, this is hot garbage, you should probably fix it? Where do you come in at?
So it can be all over the place. Usually it's not at the beginning of things. Usually it's after people or after a company has grown out a bit and they've looked at things and they realize that they don't have a good grasp of where things are, or where they should be in many cases. And they're looking for advice, and they're worried about a couple of major things. One is they're worried about nation states,
Right.
and they are worried about whether all their blinky lights are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And when I come in, I try to come in at a different level. And the first thing is to figure out, are you are you even doing anything that's close to best practices?
Right.
And I'm sure some people that are listening in are kind of rolling their eyes at the nation state thing because everybody's worried about nation states. But as everybody knows, if you're worried about that, but you're not worried about the script kiddies, your priorities are a bit off.
Right.
Um, and so ideally, if you don't know what your goal needs to be, that's where an architecture review really comes in. You can use that to help figure out what your priorities are going to be. Um, you never had a pen test? Get an architecture review first, because
Mm.
that'll help you to figure out not just what to go after, but where to where your pen testers need to start from. Um, if you've had a pen test, great. If it's at all possible, let the person doing the architecture review see it. Um, that can help to maybe find some of the places that haven't been that haven't had too close a look. Um, Another thing that I've run into is clients that are trying to shoot way too high. Um, so for a long time, there were terms like SP 800-53 and SP 800-171 that you really only knew about if you were doing deep dive in compliance, and a lot of it was sort of governmentish compliance stuff. And but these are tomes. I mean, each one is like 500 pages long. Um, and if you don't know what your network looks like, that's not the right place to be starting. And NIST has helped out with the cybersecurity framework. I've been seeing a ton of interest in the cybersecurity framework, uh, but it's still some work to get there. And it's often better to start focusing on, is your network segmented? Um, do you have basic password controls in place? Do you know who's actually on your network and what they're allowed to get to? Um, those kind of things will feed into what can become cybersecurity framework, CSF,
Right.
or some of the other things that are out there. But you need to have a little more grounded starting point on things. Um, an architecture review can help out at any point, but like anything, the earlier you bring security in on it, the better, easier, and frankly less expensive the result is going to be.
Right. So I don't want to use the term shift left. I think that's probably been overdone. And but what I love to understand is if what do you look for when you're let's say you come in, you look at the architecture diagrams. What kind of things are you looking? Are there different types of architecture diagrams that are better for figuring out the scope of things? My friend Dr. Cowan, who I'll tell him I give him a shout out here. He had a specific way of doing architecture diagrams where he was showing things like where auth boundaries are and where data flow goes through an auth boundary, or maybe it doesn't go through an auth boundary, or being able to explain, okay, this web application is going to send data to this database, and this database automatically trusts everything that comes from this application. So there's there's no authorization there. Or how specific do you want to get with an architecture diagram? I mean, obviously there's the 10,000 foot level where it's like, oh, you have a user, you go to a web page, they type a bunch of stuff in, and it goes into a block over here that is a database or a Redis or something. How deep are you expecting there? I mean, are you about to tell me it depends, or is there a good happy medium?
I'd like to start with actually having a diagram. That's a
Okay.
good start.
Okay. Okay.
And that is often lacking. Usually when I ask for a network diagram, what I get are the cabling diagrams, which they're they're useful. They're useful in some contexts. Um, that's going to tell me, okay, yes, your switches and your routers and your firewalls are all properly wired up for redundancy, and great,
Right.
you have whichever protocol is running. Great. Okay, that's all useful information. But what I need to know is, where is the data going?
Right.
Where is it not going? Stuff like that. And a lot of places simply do not have that kind of diagram. They don't they don't they, if you sit down and you actually talk with them, they can tell you where all the data is going, or at
Right.
least where it's supposed to be going. Um, but in many cases, they don't have it. I mean, I'm going to start off by sending a list of questions, and a lot of it is document requests. So I want to see your network diagrams. I want to see your firewall rules, your switch and router ACLs, um, your policies and procedures. Basically, it's a big document dump.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a document you don't have, that's fine. Yes, it's a finding, but it's something that can be fixed. But I find that the lack of a network diagram can lead to a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. And it's frustrating to me from a couple of levels. One, because I was kind of brought up relying on data flow diagrams.
Right.
Um, but so without that, I have to dig more and to work on things. But it's also it's frustrating. So yeah, it's frustrating from a sort of historical, my own, I can't see what's going on, but it's also frustrating because I now have to spend time on figuring all of that out. That is time that is potentially taken away from other aspects, where I'm
Mm.
figuring out something that is really fundamental, that should probably be there. And if I gotta note corrections on it, fine. But
Right.
having to build it from scratch is really difficult.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Um, uh, yeah. I would imagine if they haven't built an architecture diagram, and maybe we're just I don't want to say splitting hairs, but we're using different. They gave you asked for an architecture diagram. They gave you router ports and cabling guides and everything like that. Is there a better is there a better term for that they might understand? It's like your process flow diagram or your debt. We've
I,
sometimes used data flow diagrams or something like that. But I mean, is it better to say we're looking for a data architecture review or a process architecture review or something like that instead of a security architecture review?
so those can be part of it, or those can be separate. When I'm doing the security architecture review, I'm not so much focused on what the data is doing, more as much as I am focused on where it's going and where it's not going,
Mm-hmm.
and ensuring that the boundaries are there. I to to some degree, I don't care what your application is doing. I just care that the data is staying in whatever silos it's supposed to be staying in.
Mm.
So I don't get into I don't get very deep into development practices. I do get into things like are you excuse me, are you do you have a and now the acronym is escaping me. Um, but do you have your standards documented? Your Do you have specific languages documented, versions? Do you have your code practices all documented?
Right.
Um, what the code is actually doing, I'm not usually intimately involved in that part of things. Um, there are some process pieces that I will get involved in, uh, which is where the policies and procedures come into play, because um, knowing how the people are interacting with the technology is critical for understanding how the data is being managed and what the potential is for that data to start wandering out of places that it's supposed to be.
Right. Right. Okay. So let's say they gave you a diagram. When you're first going through it, there must be some gotchas that you see immediately. What are I mean, you've done this more than a few times, I'd imagine. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the first things you see when you're looking at a typical diagram? You're like, there's not just where the data is located, because I mean that you kind of build your the idea is you're building your security architecture around the things that you need to protect, which is usually the data. But are there things that you immediately see when they're doing that? Is it like a non-standard format? I mean, is it what are some of the things you typically see there? Errors that you're like you can point out immediately and go, you're not doing this or you're not doing this.
So the main thing is not segmenting the networks. And it's not just keeping HR from talking to finance, although that's part of it. It's also isolating the server architectures. There really is not, in most cases, a really good reason um, for your domain controllers to be sitting on the same network as your databases. Yes, they
Hmm.
need to talk. No, they don't need to be on the same layer two fabric. Um, Keep them apart from each other, and uh, open up the ports that are necessary and close off everything else. And that's 90 plus percent of the first of what I spot first time. Because everybody's they put all their servers in the same subnet because it's easy, and they isolate it off so that IT can access the admin stuff. But the problem is that you've got web ports and database ports open to various subnets, and somebody gets in there and now they've got full access inside, and oftentimes uh, there's not a whole lot in the way of alerting on traffic that shouldn't be there. Another
Hmm.
thing is relying on switch ACLs. Uh, yes, you can set up ACLs to block traffic. It's appropriate in some it's appropriate in for some environments. But in most cases, I really do like to see an actual firewall that's logging the traffic, and that is capable of alerting when something is trying to go in a direction that it's not supposed to be going. Um, it is a bit more expensive to set that all up. It does take a little bit more work to understand what the data flows are, but it's also a massive reduction in the overall threat surfaces. Um,
Right. Right.
if the only port that's open, uh, with the exception of the domain controllers, but if the only port that's open to anything on a database server is the actual database port, you have really shrunk down the potential threat surface. And then that server probably should only be accessible from the web application or whatever application that needs to talk to it, and then ideally a jump network. But if not that, then the IT group or the database devs that can get access to it. And yeah, you can do that with switch ACLs. That tends to be more difficult because you're keeping track of a lot of stuff in a lot of different places. You're not getting much or anything in the way of logging, and so you end up with this blind spot that you don't even realize is there.
Right. So you've highlighted a couple of risks. It sounds like, the network segmentation means that it's easier, the lack of network segmentation in this case, it makes it easier for somebody to do something like lateral movement through your network. If somebody was to gain access through your database, because we know that there's no vulnerabilities in databases that could, cause you to any issues. There's lack of logging, which is another whole thing that probably should go in there at some point in your architecture diagrams. Like, okay, all the logs are going to go someplace. Is it a Splunk? Is it in a different network? Are you logging it all? Who's going to have access to those? Do you look for things like I don't know. I don't know if you've ever seen documents that show you things like who has access to those systems or anything like that. I mean, I'm trying to see if there's any kind of standardization that you look for, you suggest, and you're like, okay, yeah, this document is great, but you're missing a handful of things that would really make it easier for me, the potential pen tester, or me, the the system architect, to look at. And you've got you got a pen test coming up in a couple weeks, and you could have used that or had that ability. So, are there any other things that you would suggest there in terms of documentation for scope purposes, or for informing people? Because sometimes we don't ask the right questions and we miss things.
Yeah, I will often ask for some technical information to be included. I can run it if necessary. When I'm doing architecture reviews, I try not to do a whole lot of technical touching. Um, the but I'll ask them to run Bloodhound, have one of their domain admin accounts run Bloodhound, and
Mm-hmm.
get that over to me securely. Um, if they have if whatever their latest vulnerability scan results are, depending on the environment, maybe an Nmap scan, if they don't really have a good idea of what their network looks like. Um, the tools will vary. The requests will vary a bit, and the tools will vary a bit. But yeah, Bloodhound is, I think, is probably the most common one. If they're running Linux or BSD, or some other non Bloodhound friendly architecture, then I will ask for config dumps. And I'm used to going through config dumps. I've
Right.
seen yeah, I've had database server configs provided. Taking a step back, I've had router and switch configs provided that have literally hundreds or even thousands of ACLs, and parsing through that is a bit of a challenge. Um, even when you have tools to help you figure out what those look like. Um, yeah, typically I'm getting, if a client is fairly well, it has things fairly well documented, I'm probably getting in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 documents pretty easily. Um,
Wow.
if not, I may still end up getting 50 or 60 documents to go through, uh, when you start including the configuration dumps. So there can be a lot, there can be a whole lot to go through, but everything that they provide is useful information, and everything that they don't provide is useful information.
Right. So how difficult do you find it is to get things like cloud configured, the AWS or the Googles of the world, or the Azures, maybe you have them run something like Scout Suite, or to look for you're not just configure, because you're looking for configuration issues with Scout Suite, but there's also other things that you can find with that tool, or Paku or something else like that. Do you find that those are useful, or are they just like,
They
these are house cleaning or hygiene things that you should be doing automatically? So if you're not doing them now, start doing them.
Yeah, I find that either there's a lot of documentation on how the cloud system works, or how the cloud architecture works, or there's absolutely nothing. There's really not anything in between. And the various reporting tools that are out there can help. Um, a lot of times they end up telling me kind of what I already know. They can help to provide some direction, certainly, but they can, if they tell me, well, we don't have time to get you the cloud configuration, so we're just going to give you an account and you can log in and look for yourself.
Oof.
That is frighteningly common.
Wow.
Um,
That's some trust right there, you know?
well, they're already handing over their firewall and configs and their Bloodhound stuff, so I'm
Sure.
hoping that
Yeah.
they trust me with it.
That's true.
Um, and I do ask for read-only accounts. I don't want something
Ah,
in there
okay.
because not only do I not need that access, I don't want it. And I
Exactly.
try to run a tight ship myself, but the less risk there is of somebody getting to your systems through my systems, the better.
Right.
Um, and but it's yeah, it's just there really is not much in the way in between. What's often happening for those that don't have any documentation at all and are willing to just give me the access, is that they are so busy fighting fires that most of the rest of their architecture review is also going to be working on identifying the gaps.
Mm.
And and that can be really rough, uh, because I really do like to find the things that they're doing well. If you're doing
Right.
something well, I'm going to call it out, not only to give you a pat on the back, but to let whoever in management is reading the thing to know, uh, letting them know there are good things that are coming out of this. Um, you know, very rarely do I go into a place that has a lot of problems and not find at least one thing that they're doing well. Some little pet project that somebody put together that locked down some corner of the network really well, and maybe it can be expanded.
Right.
Um, but and I also try to be understanding of what's going on. Um, if locking down just a regular office that's selling widgets, uh, that's one thing. Locking down, for example, a hospital, that's hard.
Right.
That is
Right.
because you are literally dealing with people's lives there. And when I go in and say, well, the best thing that you can do to reduce the overall threat profiles is to start isolating the networks, doing your network segmentation, they start backing up, because what's going through their head is the alerts aren't coming off of the various systems and landing on the nurses' stations. Um,
Right.
and I'm looking at it more of like, does HR really need access to the IVs? Probably not.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
but the path to get there, you have to be understanding uh, going into this. And I mean, I've worked in financial, or I've worked with financial clients. I've worked with medical clients. Um, I've worked with power stations. They all have their own challenges, and they all have their own sort of panic moment when bringing up some of these things. And um, I would love to be able to hand them a magic wand and say, just do this.
Right.
But I realize that a lot of the stuff that they're going to be doing is a multi-phase and may take several years. Um, I there was one person that I talked to, was not a client, but it was somebody I was talking to at a conference about it, and it was a hospital, and they like the idea of segmenting the network and like isolating all these different parts of what goes on, even on the medical side of things. And they were like, that's a decade-long project.
Right.
And yeah, it absolutely can be because of all the testing you have to do and all the monitoring and all the data collection that you have to do before you can be certain that when you actually close off those two networks, that you're not going to kill somebody.
Right.
Um,
So
so
okay, I will. So there have been a lot of hospitals in the news forever, and will continue to be because they're
yeah,
hospitals. Um, Hospitals don't see IT as important, apparently, or they do, and they just have no way of fixing it. Because my thought is they're not going to care about the IT department until they treat it the same as their patients.
they they have certain priorities that are not in line with what a lot of IT security people consider to be important. And this is a running problem. You get management is concerned about one thing, and you have the people in the trenches that are concerned about a very different thing, and you can't get the two of them to talk to each other.
Right.
Um, and that's actually one of the things that I like about the about what I do is management is paying, they're writing a check for somebody on the outside. They want to listen. And so and then the people are um the sysadmins and so forth. uh they want the outside perspective of things, of how can they do their job easier, how can they get their message across better, stuff like that. And so they're willing to listen. And so now I have two audiences that are open to listening to somebody, and maybe I can get the two of them to start talking a little bit.
Right.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I like to think that I've at least opened a door once I've left, and gotten
Yeah.
them talking. um, I come back later on sometimes and I find out that very little has changed because the two of them still can't agree on priorities. But
Yeah.
I think in most cases the reviews do help to get, maybe not getting everybody on the same page, but at least drawing them a little bit closer and maybe helping them to understand each side's different priorities.
Yeah. So I posted a link up in our chat, both of them, the YouTube and the Twitch stream, about Lurie Children's Hospital that's been offline for 2 weeks. Well, they were offline for 2 weeks. I'm actually trying to find out if they've had any updates from that, but they got hit with ransomware, and for 2 weeks they've been doing everything with paper because everything got owned up. And my this should scare the hell out of every hospital administrator in the country to go, maybe we should do something about our IT networks. But we know that's not going to happen. My thought is they're like, oh, thank God it wasn't us. We can continue acting like nothing's gone wrong until it's them, or until it's another hospital in the Chicago area, or, another children's hospital somewhere else. If hospitals aren't going to change after so many ransomware attacks that have already occurred, what kind of you go in and you do reviews and you do security architecture reviews and you bring to light these issues, and then you go back and you said yourself very little happens because they can't figure out how to work together. Um, do you have any, I don't want to say any control, but do you have any way of, follow up work, or are you, hiring yourself out as a security PM to go, okay, I'm going to manage helping you through the changes in this thing? I mean, I can see that as a very lucrative, I find the problems, and then, I'm going to direct your IT and your security teams and your hospital teams to actually, here's the plan to fix that. Here's all the things that I've outlined in this 500-page document. Here's the schedule and how you need to implement these things. So, I mean, do you have that kind of ability, or is it like, here's 500 pages of paper that you're, paying me X number of dollars for, and I know that I'm going to be back writing, just changing the date on the same report, and the same shit's going to be coming back next year? I mean, that's got to feel kind of deflating for you, right?
Yeah, it can. But yeah, I got my start on the offensive side in pen testing, and coming back year after year and doing exactly the same pen test. There are some clients that are willing to write the check and not willing to make the changes. And it's frustrating. And sometimes the most that you can hope for is that somebody is going to change, or that there's going to be a change in personnel that is going to be willing to listen. And you go in and you do it, because if you don't, and they're just going to coast, then they have no idea.
Right.
Um, Sometimes you go in and you just, maybe somebody's going to read this report and realize that something needs to change. And and then you do come back, and it's like, oh wait, this isn't. They closed off these three main paths that we've been doing the last 2 years, 3 years.
Right.
Okay, something has actually finally changed, and they, oh well, yeah, so and so read the report and really realized that this has been a problem.
Mm.
Um, And you see the same thing in the architecture reviews, where usually you don't get one every year, but you might come back a couple of years later and they ask you to do another one. And um, you write it up and they, well, wait, this looks a lot like your last one. It's like, well, yeah, it's because not much has changed. I mean, you handed over a bunch of policies and procedures that had exactly the same date. And when I talk to your people, your Windows servers are all being built by hand. None of them actually adhere to this automated process that you think is running. Um, Another thing that I've run into, to give you something a little scarier, and I've run into this in more than one client, is that the incident response team does not know the incident response plan because it's been hidden from them.
Oh,
Because
wait. Why is the IR plan hidden from the IR team?
because if the IR team knows what the IR plan is and they get upset at the company, then they might be able to figure out a way to work around it.
I'm sorry. Wait, my so if the IR team knew what was in the IR plan, they would try to work around it.
Yeah, if they were angry at if they were angry at their employer, that they could figure out a way of hacking the employer so that the in a way that would not be that the IR plan could not respond to. And I have
That
run into this at multiple locations.
so they're so worried about insider threat from their own IR teams that
Mhm.
they don't. So who the hell's writing the IR plan then?
Management. And
And man, it
they're typically the IR plans are typically aimed more at how management is going to respond. Which, by the way, I don't mind that management has their own IR plan. I actually wish that more places would have a separate IR plan for management. It should mesh with the IR plan, the technical IR plan, but it shouldn't be the only one.
right,
And it shouldn't. You also shouldn't have your management people, for the most part, trying to write the technical stuff. Um, it's not their field. Um,
right,
but I've mentioned before to some clients, you don't wait. If you're a bank, you don't wait to train your tellers on how to deal with a holdup until there's a gun pointed at them.
right, right,
You train them ahead of time. And yes, you might be training somebody on how to get around the holdup procedures, but the odds of the other uh, situations seem to be a lot stronger.
right.
And yeah, it's just you run into these things that just make no sense, and until you call it out, they oftentimes don't realize it.
Well, so the other idea, and I mean, we've gone a little far afield with the security assessment stuff, but I'm finding this fascinating. So the management has an IR plan. Does the IR team have their own IR plan, or are they just waiting for
Kind of.
something like a lockbit to happen at Lurie's Children's Hospital, and then they're just gonna run around flailing their arms and screaming?
Yeah. So what ends up happening is they have their own sort of impromptu. We respond to these little virus outbreaks as needed, and they go in and they clean, or if they're not sure if they can clean it out, they'll just wipe the system and reissue it. And um, but these are places that have never had to deal, for the most part, with a significant breach.
Hmm.
Um, that somebody gets into one app server. Okay, well, they figure out how they get in and they close it off. Um, or like I said, a workstation gets hit by a virus, they reimage it, and they don't they don't go through exercises, they don't go through tabletops.
Yeah,
They
that
might
was
actually
that.
give them training. They might actually send them to training, send to SANS or whatever, which is good. But they end up not having an actual written procedure practiced uh, periodically to determine whether it works and whether it's going to fit. They just
Yeah,
sort of hope that the management one never has to get pulled out, or if it does, they figure that management's going to be able to run the thing,
right.
and that just often is not the case.
Yeah, that's nuts because my next thought was, well, it's obvious they're not doing any tabletop exercises because then the IR team would know what's in the IR plan. But there's other there's specific and when you said the management has an IR plan, what I was guessing was it's very similar to how you're supposed to go back to paper and pencil, instead of or writing down what's going on, and then you add it later in the EMRs or what have you if it's been uploaded. Not just the computer system. So I'm hoping the IR teams at some of these hospitals have IR playbooks. Have you ever been to a hospital that's dealt with a major breach, and have you noticed a difference between what happens post, ransomware, if they've been hit with the lock bits versus, somebody who's up here in the clouds going, oh, our hospital's safe, we haven't been hit yet.
I haven't with any of the hospitals I've worked with for architecture reviews. I Without getting too far into things because that's only one, but I have been involved with a hospital where there was a pen test and um, the they dealt with a breach later on that I think would have been prevented had they been a little quicker on addressing the stuff with the pen test. They did seem to be a lot more interested in the results of the reports.
Right.
After that, it's yeah, there's a lot of places that just like, well, we haven't had to deal with it yet, so we're just going to cross our fingers and hope that we never have to deal with it. And they kind of figure, well, there's X number of thousand hospitals in the country, and there's only one or two getting hit each month. But the thing is it's only one or two that you hear about.
Right.
And eventually you're going to stop hearing about them because they become so common.
Right. Oh God, that that makes my brain hurt. That makes my brain hurt.
And I will tell you that I virtually always find out about these because I get told by the IR team that they don't know, that they've never seen the actual IR plan. And that's why, in my mind, it is really important to not just read over all the documents, but to actually sit down and interview people.
Right.
Sit down with the IR team, sit down with the server admins. I try to sit down with help desk and find out, if they see clues of that something doesn't feel right, do they know what they're supposed to do? And oftentimes it's just, I open a ticket and then I pass it on. Okay, well, if you're getting a whole bunch of calls in that all sound like something is, there's some weird thing going on, then you need to have a path over to security. And there are just so many places that don't have things like that. It's just like, here's security, and then here's everything else, and we do all our security stuff is over here. And if security detects it, they work with it. And if anybody else detects it, well, we'll figure out some way of getting them to talk.
Right. And so what's the I shouldn't have gone down this road with healthcare, but it's a morbid fascination of mine, the healthcare industry and education, which are the two most, at least every week you see a school that's been popped, or you see a hospital that's been popped, or a bit of both. And it's like, it must be like cloud cuckoo land over there, where everybody's just like, oh, well, we lived another day. We didn't get a ransomware or what have you. And, we can't, we don't have the budget for this because we have to put teachers in classrooms, or, we have to have doctors. So, we can't invest in this box, or, make these decisions. Yet they'll throw, I don't mean this to sound negative, but they're going to throw money at you to tell them what's wrong and then not fix it, because they think that that's going to fix the problem. And so when they bring you in, is this a compliance requirement usually?
Sometimes. Well, I mean, so what they'll do, because I'm not certified for most of the stuff, but
okay. Jarrod will be back in a second, and now you can see my office. He'll be back in a second. It's okay. I'm going to cut this out later on. Man, my hair's all hot garbage. Oh, be right back, power. Okay, he's got power issues, so it's all good. I'm just going to vamp here. So, okay. I'm gobsmacked, truly. I know I shouldn't be, but these industries just kill me. Hey, Digital Warhead, what's going on, man? Hope you're getting something out of this with Jarrod. If you've missed the first 30 minutes, I highly recommend you go back and watch our VOD. we've been talking about some. So digital. You've run some IR in the past, right? Digital Warhead is on our Twitch chat right now. Jarrod just told me that there's IR teams that don't actually see the IR plan, and I'm it's like, oh my god, because usually the IR plan in most organizations, I would say in millions of organizations, are the ones who actually draft the flipping plan, and it just kills me, right? When Jarrod gets back, and I have a feeling it was, he didn't plug in his MacBook or something. It died. So I want to talk about the threats, because it feels like he goes in and he talks about these folks, and all they care about is the nation states, the impotent Pooh Bears, and it's funny how panda bears and Russian bears are about the same, but they don't actually. I mean, we talked about insider threat. They're worried about the IR teams, working around the IR plan or something like that. I'm just gobsmacked about that, but I think it's great having the diagrams, being able to go, okay, this is where our data sets. This is where, this is the database where our database sets. This is the Redis, database where our data sets, or this is an S3 bucket of where this exists in our network. And it's not, having some standardized security, like, not having it world readable, or, making sure that there's some kind of, authentication, authorization, or was it AAA authentication authorization? And there he is. Hey, he's back. He's getting there. There he is. Hello. You're muted. There you go, man.
Yeah.
Hey.
Real professional setup there on my part, isn't it?
That's okay. You sound a little swimmy right now, like you're underwater. Give me another sound check real quick.
Yeah, let's try that.
Are you using the same mic that you were using before?
Hold on.
You would think that I'm like freaked out over this, but shit like this happens to me all the time. So I'm more than fine.
Wow.
So, I'm sorry.
No, that's screaming? Okay. No, I was trying to set my own audio on my side and get things working right. And
okay.
I switched the speakers to my earpieces and just got blasted.
At 100%, yeah. Okay.
Okay. So sorry, go ahead.
We were talking about ouch. They throw money at you, and you said you aren't you aren't certified for like HIPAA and high trust. I mean, I think they're HIPAA, high trust, and meaningful use, like certified for auditing kind of purposes.
Yes. So yeah, to get actually certified for that is really expensive and typically requires degrees that I don't have and stuff like that. But where I will often come in is the prep for that. Somebody knows that they need to get some certification, and they want me to come in and say, okay, well, according to PCI, according to HIPAA, according to whichever, how close are we? And that can kind of get them on the road. Ideally, they are calling me like way before they need it.
Right.
I occasionally get a call. It's like, so we have a PCI guy coming in 3 months. Can you come in and have a look at our network? I'm like, you're probably not going to get the stuff fixed by the time
exactly.
Your guy shows up. But it's something to keep in mind is that there are HIPAA auditors. There's no HIPAA certification. You can't be HIPAA certified. You can comply with HIPAA. And that in itself is tricky. The HIPAA, if you go back and you look through HIPAA, there are a few things that are concrete. If you're sharing health data, you have to have a BAA, a business associate agreement. And there are a few other things, but it says you must encrypt your data. Okay.
Right.
Great. I'm going to encrypt it with zip, whatever zips, the old zip one, which I think was DES based.
Right.
And um okay, yeah, kind of, you're complying, but you're not really.
Right.
And for a while, the federal government was sort of like, yeah, we'd really like you to fix this stuff, and we'd really like you to use better practices and so forth. And I can tell you, I got a chance years ago to talk to somebody who was involved in drafting the actual regulations, and they told me that they really wish that they had been able to attach more teeth to it, or tie
Right.
it to NIST uh, requirements.
Right.
And they weren't sure that they could have actually gotten it passed. And so they ended up with something that was much more ambiguous.
Right.
Over time, there have been growing penalties, and most of the penalties are still that I read about are still in the like $50,000 to $100,000 range.
Yep.
Those are typically against doctors' offices. It's enough to sting, but it's not enough to put them out of business. There have been a few multi-million-dollar ones. And there was one, I haven't seen one similar to this, but I think it was the first really, really big fine. And it was an EMR company, that not only was the company fined, but officers in the company and even individual developers were fined because their practices were so bad, that they felt that there was no way to actually get them to fix things unless everybody got hit. And they made a big story about it, and I think that woke a lot of people up. But there still isn't the kind of enforcement that I think we need to see in that.
Yeah.
As much as I understand the difficulty for hospitals and so forth, I still think that we need to see more strict enforcement, and I think we need to see some updates to tie HIPAA compliance to NIST or other standards.
Yeah. I just posted up, sorry about that. I just posted up an article. They just gave a declaration from the Office of Civil Rights for $4.75 million to a company called Montefiore Medical Center over HIPAA violations. The investigation started in 2015, so it took them nearly 10 years to hit somebody with $4.75 million, or hit the organization with that. One of its employees accessed 12,500 patient records, and sold that information to identity theft ring. And they said over the next 8 years, the investigation included significant HIPAA violations, including failure to conduct an accurate and thorough enterprise security risk analysis, which is something I'm sure that's why you come in to do, some of those things. Failure to implement procedures to regularly review information system activity logs, access reports, and security incident tracking, and failure to implement hardware, software, and/or procedural mechanisms that record and examine activity of information systems that contain or use PHI. So they agreed to conduct a thorough risk analysis, a methodology for which requires OCR's approval. So the OCR does have to, I think, for some of these more severe cases now, they are going to have OCR crawling up their ass for the next X number of years to make sure that they're doing the needful there. But 12,500 people have now been opened up to potential identity theft because of this one employee. So, okay. We've gone down a really deep rabbit hole, and I want to dig ourselves out of that. Yeah. So I want to go back to threats, because you mentioned, so far we've mentioned insider threat, we mentioned nation states, and we've mentioned things like lateral movement and those things. Those are potential. Well, lateral movement is a threat from an external actor or a nation state. But when you come in and you do these analysis of these reviews, and obviously the threat model is part of it, I'm assuming you're using Stride or something similar for your threat methodologies when you go and do these, or do you have something specific that you've created?
It depends. A lot of times the client will have a specific request. PCI is a really common one. So, and I don't No, PCI is not what it needs to be. PCI 4 definitely has some improvements. It doesn't go far enough and it doesn't have enough teeth, in large part because everybody's afraid of slicing big companies out of the market. But that's probably the most common one. HIPAA is probably the second most common one. And so what they're looking for is, you know, they're looking for more of a checkbox approach of, go through the different sections and how closely are we adhering to whatever these requirements are. They're not. I've used Stride in the past. It works to some degree. Um, if I'm coming in kind of blind, I don't always come in with a specific architecture because I need to find out where they're at. Um, and in a lot of cases, it's just getting some basic good practices into place.
Mm.
Things like asset management.
Right.
And I've been trying to use CSF a little bit more in this. I've also in the past I've used ISO 27002 as a bit of a
That's a
checklist.
big one. Yeah, that's a big one.
It is, in some ways it's simpler than using CSF because the number of the breadth is similar. The number of controls, the number of named controls is a little bit smaller. And it's a little easier to kind of run down the checkbox and kind of hit, okay, which of these things are you actually doing? And which of these things do you have documentation for? And which of these things do your people actually know how they're supposed to be doing it? Once I've got that, then I can go into a deeper level. And I've actually done some threat modeling under wow, it's escaping me. Trike. And Trike, I think it's Trike. Hold on. Yeah. So Trike is an extraordinarily detailed threat modeling process where you don't want to do it for an entire environment, but I have done Trike for individual applications, and you're keeping track of everything that moves inside an application. You're keeping track of the cookies that are moving around. You're keeping track of the API tokens that are moving around. You're keeping track of the data objects that are moving around. And determining what can see it, what can't, who can touch it, what processes can do different things with it. That's rare that depth is required, but it's an option. And
yeah, I mean, you can get pretty specific there. It's like down to per processor, or if you're doing things inside the system that's crunching numbers, it's like, do you have authenticated mechanisms for this system, this process to hand off to this one, or maybe you've got encryption between processes, because when the data comes in, it may be encrypted. This process does something with it and sends it to this one, but they may not encrypt it from process A to process B. So if you can inject something between those two processes, or insert yourself, host in the middle, or bad actor in the middle, you can sniff that traffic or sniff whatever came out of the process over here, and into some sort of potential readable format. So
yeah, and when you get microservices architectures, it gets even trickier.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So when you go, so we mentioned nation state actors, you mentioned insider threat, which insider threat for a hospital, as we've seen with the example of the Montefiore, whatever healthcare center, was a legit one. When somebody says, hey, we're worried about China hacking us, what do you tell them? You tell them, is that legit? Because my whole thing is, we've seen other stories about I think there was a story this week about post-quantum encryption for iMessaging on Apple, and we got into it a little bit in our Slack channel. I was like, if you need post-quantum encryption on your, hey, honey, go grab me some milk from the store, I think your threat model is you're not going to be using a phone. So, when somebody when you come in and do a review and they're like, oh, we're worried about China or whatever, do you ever tell them, your you're batshit crazy, you're not that important, or do you actually just go ahead and go, okay, yeah, China, yeah, well, you're already owned, so
That is often a really difficult topic because they get worried. I don't hear about China so much these days. I hear more about Russia.
Sure,
But
sure,
they so there were two uh, there were two attacks that came along a couple of years ago about the same time. There's the SolarWinds hack that was Russia,
right,
where they for anybody who's not familiar with it, uh, Russian hackers managed to get inside SolarWinds and modify the actual source code.
right,
And the other one was the Exchange vulnerability. I think it was an Exchange webmail vulnerability that allowed unauthenticated, full unauthenticated access. And when that was about to get closed up by the FBI, um, China apparently did like just this mass raid of every Exchange server that was visible to the internet, and threw, um, they just downloaded everything that they could from anybody.
right,
And the reality is that it didn't have to be China doing that. It could have been anybody doing that. So
right,
if you're
right,
not patching fast enough to fix that, um, it doesn't matter that it's China.
right,
Uh, and there are a number of tools that are out there now that as soon as Microsoft or virtually anybody else releases a patch, there are tools that will try to put together an exploit against, they'll look at the diffs between the patches, and they'll try to
yeah,
put together an exploit. And the exploit doesn't work right there, but it gives them a start. And sometimes we see exploits, Microsoft releases at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we see exploits
yeah,
out there by 11 or 12 o'clock.
right. Well, they
And
have the bad guys have playbooks, and they've already pulled down the necessary files from someplace and have exploded them, and they can diff them. I mean, their playbook is very efficient because they
yep.
live or die by this. If they don't, the first to use it is the free. If you're 5 seconds late, your competition, which is the other bad actors, are going to beat you to the punch. So.
Well, you have these companies or you have these hacking groups that are effectively companies. They have paid subscription models, paid support, and it's their job
Yep.
to get the new exploit out, and then they sell it, and it can be anybody.
Right.
So you're not necessarily protecting against nation states. You are protecting against, trying to protect against hacking groups that are pretty good, but um, if your basics aren't there, it's not China or Russia or whoever else that you really need to worry about. Yes, they can get in, but so can so many others.
Right.
And they can bounce around for a while. And if you're not looking in the right place, and that's another thing, by the way, the architecture reviews can do is figure out where are your actual blind spots. If you can have whole sections of your network that there's no logging coming in, so you have no idea what's bouncing around there. And if you're not able to see any of that stuff, you're going to fall prey to just kind of the regular ones or even the script kiddies. And the script kiddies are probably going to come in and you're going to pick them up relatively quickly, but somebody with just a little bit of skill and experience is going to know how to remain relatively quiet. And they can
Right.
stick around in your network for days, weeks, months before you figure out that they're there.
Right. And it's not hard if you're not logging anything. You don't get any alerts. Nothing's going wrong. You don't. You don't know.
Or if you're not paying attention to the logs, or if you're getting too many logs. If
Right.
your IDS is looking for attacks against systems you don't even have. If you're a Windows shop, your IDS probably shouldn't be paying a whole lot of attention to the Linux attacks.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 This is. Yeah. Some of these industries, I don't want to say are ill-equipped. It's just there's a culture of, not. I don't want to say not caring. It's just their priorities are completely business side. And I was talking with somebody the other day about ways to implement security that actually helps with productivity. And she actually mentioned a hospital, and she said, I was working with a hospital and we implemented MFA. and it actually caused an increase in productivity at the same time of implementing security, because the doctors didn't have to, have a post-it note with their password on it, or, have to remember a password to log in every day. And it's like, oh shit, what's my password? Oh yeah, it's Chargers 97 or something like that. Having a badge where they could just tap and go increased productivity because they could do things a lot faster. And I think one of the other things she mentioned was, MFA for VPN, so they could be more, they didn't have to drive into the office to do their notes or what have you. I don't want to say it blew my mind, but it was awesome to hear somebody implementing security that was helping the business do better. And I don't know if there's enough of that going on right now in our industry that we can say, okay, if we can frame it as it's a productivity thing, it will help with productivity, it'll help with, saving time and effort and what have you. I just don't know if we have enough examples of that in our industry to be able to say that.
I think we're getting there. So I'll tell you a quick little story. A number of years ago, our youngest was having some medical issues, and we had to take him for a procedure. And the section of the medical center that we were in, it was closed off to anybody except for patients and medical personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw one of the nurses came up, and she logged into the computer at bedside with one of these tap cards.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I have never seen, can you tell me about this? And she said, well, what we do is when we get to work, there's a station outside in the sort of general employee area. They log in there, they tap their card, that activates it. And then when they're inside the patient area, any system that's there, they tap it and it logs them in on that station. They do whatever they need to. They log out and they go and they do whatever. And as long as they're in there, that card works. And then on their way out, they tap the logout station, and then the card can't be used until they log back in. And I was like,
Genius.
That is a brilliant approach of making it easy while still putting some barriers in place. You have to have the card. And in order to activate the card, you have to know whatever other credentials. Now, I didn't get into, I didn't talk to her about anything more than like username and password. That was the first time that I saw it. And then a couple years later, I started seeing it in other healthcare facilities. And it is now become commonplace. I see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And I've moved a lot of my own personal and work logins over to a YubiKey 5 using Fido.
Yep.
And I got the YubiKey 5. I plug it in. Now I got I got to put in a passcode and I got to touch it, so I don't have the biometric one. I would certainly consider biometric the next time around. I just don't have the need to spend another $60 on it. But there's the NFC.
I've got one too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
with the NFC bit on it, yeah.
Yeah. Now I haven't been able to get the NFC working, and that might just be my notebook, but my desktop is too old. But that kind of thing, it makes things. Yeah, I did exactly the same thing. It's like, wait, my phone does NFC. Why is this not working? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think there are groups that have really tried to look at this and try to figure out, how do we not just make the security better, but also how do we make it easier for users? And I get into these discussions from time to time, and people say, well, you're just moving the attack surface from one location to another. And I'm like, yeah, you're also making it narrow focused. Yes. Okay. Look, if I'm after Brian's credentials, and I know that he uses a biometric based YubiKey, yeah, I can hit him in the back of the head, throw him in the back of a van, take him wherever I need, and use his fingerprint on the YubiKey to log in. Great. The problem is, I had to approach you. I had to do something to get your YubiKey, and I had to do something to get your fingerprint.
Right.
I have now raised the risk to myself as an attacker dramatically.
Right.
And there are other ways of doing it, but it's raising the difficulty. And I don't have anywhere that I can go that I can just dump the entire password database and then use that to get in. Or
Yeah.
as we saw, this is actually kind of going a ways back, but when all the RSA seeds, all the RSA device seeds got leaked, um, and suddenly all the RSA devices, if you knew what the serial number was and the seed hadn't been changed somehow, uh, you had the MFA for your target.
Yep. Yeah, I work a lot with people who deal with risks at work, and we've had a couple of meetings, I don't know, gone 90 minutes or so because of, and I'm going to keep this fairly generic because I like working at my job and making money and being able to eat food and stuff. We'll talk about a problem that exists in the organization, and or we'll get something from bug bounty program or something like that, and the researchers like, oh, this is the worst thing next to sliced bread, you're already owned up, just give me all the monies right now because I've just showed you how to be completely owned. And you read through the write-up and you realize, okay, one, you can't do this from everywhere in the world. You have to be literally down the street from somebody if it's a wireless kind of thing, or if it's a Bluetooth kind of thing, or, people who go to Vegas are like, oh, you got to get a burner phone or whatever. If you get somebody close enough that they can actually physically touch you, you're going to know it. I've been in hotels and stuff, and I've been in fairly close quarters. If somebody bumps into you, you know it. Or if somebody tries to be sneaky and wants to go and try to scan your phone by touching your phone or whatever, you're going to know it. So, some of the write-ups we get from researchers are kind of funny. And it's like, okay, I have to literally be parked in front of your house doing a certain thing while you're doing a certain thing at the exact same time you're doing this other thing. And I'm like, this is not a bad thing. This is so focused that it can't possibly be a critical issue or, hey, I've completely owned you. What you've done is you've set up a lab where you can recreate that thing yourself and it's all safe and everything. In the real world, that doesn't happen. And I see this internally sometimes with folks who are like, oh, well, if somebody did X, Y, and Z, they could do this. I'm like, yeah, they can't do that from, if they're in Thailand and I'm in San Diego, California, they cannot own me with that vulnerability. They have to be sitting in my driveway doing that thing, or they have to be, the CVSS scores is, they've added the adjacent bit, which I love. It's like you either be on the same network or you be in proximity to that network to be able to do something. I'm like, you have to literally be on that person's network. So you have to hack their Wi-Fi. You have to know their password. You have to be literally in their house or something like that. And I'm like, the minute you can't go from Thailand to San Diego, California, and not sitting in my driveway, it's not a critical issue. Or it's like it's a device, and they're like, oh, I've got a critical issue on this device, and I'm like, yeah, that's because you were able to pop the plastic off of it and dump the firmware. Of course, you found the vulnerability that way. These are not once you've had physical access to any kind of box, it's game over. Those are not criticals. Those are that takes skill, and I use the skill thing because anybody can crack a box open, but dumping firmware is not easy. You have to know how to solder and stuff, and depending, I know some of you are like, oh, I can solder. A good majority of America can't solder for shit, and they don't understand the pinouts on a UART board, and they don't have the capability and the tech, the tools with which to do this. One, that's also a dedicated attacker. That is somebody who has a goal in mind, not just Joe Dogwalker who is like, well, I just want to crack open my device and do something with it. And it's like, these are not critical issues because it's not a determined attacker. Joe Nobody's not going to come into somebody's house at a dinner party, crack open a device or crack open a thing or leave something there. Typically, you would think. I just have a real problem sometimes with the way we assess risk from a security point of view. I don't know if we're trying to emulate what we would do. Like, oh, if I want to go to a dinner party, I'm going to leave something at the dinner party. It's like, who does that shit, So I really have a problem sometimes with how we assess risk in terms of reality versus reality. In security land, everybody's leaving, corrupted poison apple thumb drives and, dropping, O-Day and in, at dinner parties and stuff. And I just find it crazy sometimes the way we communicate risk. And it really comes off as paranoid and stupid in many cases. So sorry for the rant there. But
No, I fully agree with you. We get way too wrapped up in our own stuff. And I mean, I used to be there. I used to be, I read a report about something like, okay, how can we protect the entire multinational company from this? We don't need to protect the entire multinational company from this. We need to isolate, or we need to identify a few key people and determine how are we going to protect them. I mean, there was
right.
So thinking about a couple of things, and again, some of these are years ago. There was a CEO, and I want to, it was I'm not going to name it because I might be wrong, but it was a chip manufacturing CEO who was giving a talk at a conference and stepped away from his notebook that he had on the podium for like 30 seconds, and he came back and the notebook was gone. And my understanding was that ultimately they realized they probably should have the executives' hard drives encrypted too.
Yes,
but they didn't because the executives didn't like it, because they had to remember the pass key to get in and whatever. And I mean, this is still a problem this day. Not as much, fortunately. Executives are taking things a lot more seriously. But there are people that if the notebook goes missing, you lop it off and you don't let it access, and it can be dangerous. I'm not saying don't encrypt. Don't get me wrong. Right. But you need to look and see what the actual threat is if one of those notebooks goes wandering. Same thing on like wireless networks. If your wireless networks are structured correctly, one of the things that I've been pushing for a long time is if you're going to put up a guest network, fine, make it separate from the rest of your stuff, or at least set everything so that anything on it can never jump the gap. Now, yes, you can potentially exploit the infrastructure, but that's really, really rare. And just make it so that nothing can ever jump the gap. And I'm not worried about weirdos getting on as long as you've got decent protection on there and web filtering and so forth. But some people get really paranoid about how to protect their guest networks, and it ends up being really frustrating. It ends up being really frustrating for visitors, and I run into this periodically. So, oh, well, we got to go contact Alice for the password, but Alice isn't here today, and Bob's the backup, but Bob's in a meeting for 4 hours, and so you don't get access to the network. Right. Okay, well, I can get on my phone as a hotspot, great, but if there's something that I need off of your network, now we got to sneaker net it. There are other cases, though, where I think we do need to be careful, and one of them is international travel. Right. If you are taking any company property over borders, you are running into a very, very different threat risk, because any of those countries can take anything that you have brought in, and they can take it into another room that you have no idea what they're doing. Oh, right. So if that is the case, take a burner phone. Take a burner notebook. Right. If they ever leave your site, you don't use them for the rest of the trip. You figure out another way of doing things, or you just don't do stuff. Yeah. And this is going to depend on the countries that you go to, but it's worth talking to an international attorney and saying, okay, what are the risks if I go to this country or that country? What are the risks of if something's taken, what are my rights? And it can be really surprising. There are countries that are friendly to the United States that you have zero right, until you're actually in there. Yeah, you have your visa, great. But as far as the stuff that you're bringing in, until they sign it off, it's borderline theirs. And you don't know what's going on. And if for whatever reason you're a target, yeah. So, it's long odds on that kind of thing, but that is something where you should be thinking about that kind of thing.
Right. And you can definitely go to places like, State Department to get, travel warnings or, things to do about that. There's definitely resources out there. And technically, if your security or your company does any kind of international travel or allows for international kind of travel, they should have some kind of policy or process or procedure for, doing that properly, including things like MDM on your devices. In that case, for that kind of thing, MDM is definitely something you'd want to do, where you can, call up IT and go brick that box now, and they can brick it for you. So, yeah.
I mean, I've advised if you're traveling, you take a notebook that has nothing on it at all.
Right.
That VPN's back, and you remote desktop into whatever, and so everything you're doing is still back at home.
Right.
You can show the stuff on the screen, great. But if the notebook gets taken, if it gets stolen, if it gets lost, there's no data on it to actually worry about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's why people kind of treat DEF CON and Black Hat similarly. It's they consider it to be a super hostile network, but I have found at those conferences, unless you're doing things like the CTF, sometimes there's not even a need to take a laptop with you. The less security or less electronic footprint you've got, probably the better in those cases. And you can do most everything on your phone. Which if you really feel like you need a burner phone, go and get one. It's your money, not mine. But, it again goes back to that thing where you're going to look nuts by saying, hey, I got to go to Vegas and I have to have a burner phone and a burner laptop. It's if your threat model is such that you're worried that somebody's going to, hack your stuff, maybe you shouldn't have that there. I go back to the post-quantum, iMessaging stuff. It's like, if you need post-quantum encryption, you're not going to be using a phone. You're going to be flying and delivering those messages, or, you're going to be, you probably won't be using iMessage. You probably are using things like WhatsApp or ephemeral messaging or something like that. So,
yeah. And real quick on the post-quantum thing, it's good that that's being worked on, but I think people have a really limited understanding of what the risks are. To my knowledge, and it's been a few months since I've looked into it, but I don't think it's changed in that. To my knowledge, there is no quantum computer on the horizon that is going to suddenly make AES 256 just done. It's just cracked. My understanding is that it roughly halves the effective key size. So AES 128 becomes 64-bit, and that's a problem. AES 256 effectively becomes 128.
Right.
That's not a problem. Right. It's really not.
Not yet. Not yet. Give it time.
Not yet.
Give it time. And I understand the quantum stuff. They're trying to do things like perfect forward secrecy. So, if you're sending nudes of yourself to your significant other, or if you're sending messages that could get decrypted later, I completely understand that attack frame where it's like, in 10 years, what I'm sending now may lead me to have to go testify in front of Congress or something. I completely understand that. But like, the majority of people sending messages out there is just like, cat memes and, lol, and hey, go grab a bag of hot dogs at the supermarket. It's like, if you're going to send messages that need to be post-quantumed or, perfect forward secrecy or completely encrypted and even ephemeral, ephemeral is probably the best bet, encrypted and ephemeral, so that way it disappears and you never see it again. You're going to take the steps to make that happen. It's not going to be like, and maybe this is, you want to do everything because you're going to slip up one time and you're going to do that. I completely understand, but there's a certain threat model for everybody. And if it requires you to have those kinds of controls in place, then you're going to be living a certain way. You're not going to be, you're going to be living that life, not, like, oh, today I'm just going to wake up and start using post-quantum encryption. It's like, you got to have a reason to kind of want to implement those things. So anywho, oh my goodness, we have talked a long time. Sorry, you said there's a what?
Yeah. So there's I'm looking it up so you can throw it out there. There is a threat model that Google did. So a few years ago, Google was trying to figure out how to do end-to-end encryption in the browser. And they open sourced it, and wow, it's been almost 10 years. But they included a threat model in the in the wiki on the GitHub.
Got it. Yep.
And it is one of the best examples that I have seen of a very readable and fairly complete, by their own admission, threat model, where they go through and they identify all the potential issues and in some cases some potential fixes. But there's also a list of things that is down towards the end of other threats. Compromise through browser debugging APIs. Can't do anything about it. Backdoor and end-to-end source code. Can't, well, they can do a little bit about it, but it's hard. Denial of service. Nothing they can do about it. Flaws in cryptographic algorithms. There's not a whole lot that they can do about that. It's really readable. It's moderately long, but this is a good threat model for a focused application. If you have one platform and you're doing a threat model, this is an excellent example of how to do, going through the assets, going through the potential threats, going through the risks, the whatever fixes can be done. They got to the end of this and they went, we can't make this work to a level that we're happy with, but we're going to open source it to see if somebody else can figure out the ways of doing it.
Right.
And I'm really happy that that open sourcing included this threat model, because it's wonderfully done. Even 10 years later, I go back and I look at it and I wish I could see much more out there like this.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah. So I guess the last thing I want to ask about is, what tool, if you could tell a company, hey, this is a good tool for security architecture. I know the answer is probably Visio, but it's god awful and it's locked into things. So is there a tool that you could use that isn't Visio that does really good security architecture diagrams?
Whiteboard. Just get a whiteboard. Get a whiteboard and start putting it up there. And I mean, it sounds really crazily simple, but yeah. And sit down, get everybody in the same room, sit down and diagram your network and the data flows. Once you've got that, you can do draw.io, set up a local instance, please. But you can do it in Visio. There's a ton of platforms out there that will do this, that will do just fine in it. And document where all of your data is going. You don't have to know every one of your assets in there. You need group your databases, group your application servers. It doesn't matter if you have 1 or 2 or 10, just group them.
Right.
As long as they're all doing the same thing. And that will get you a view of things that is enormously valuable. And it's not going to be perfect the first time. You're going to get it all documented, and somebody's going to come in and say, well, wait, we forgot about this stuff over here. Great. Put it up on the whiteboard, make it look good, add it into the document.
Right.
Those data flows will give you more information, at least from a paperwork basis. They will give you more information quicker than anything else that you can do. And actually, I would say they are invaluable to new employees that are coming on, because if they can open up the document and they can see where the data is at least supposed to be going, rather than trying to go through all the different configurations and trying to figure out what goes where, and they might not have access to all the stuff that they need to understand it. It is just absolutely invaluable. And by the way, if you're in the middle of an incident and you pull that data flow diagram out, you can start figuring out what can we start blocking off safely without compromising the rest of the network. Right. And without compromising the operations for the rest of the network, shutting down too much of the network.
Yep. So one of the things that I've started using for my own side projects and stuff is Microsoft Whiteboard, which is behind an authentication and authorization. It's in your M365. It's powered by Azure. It's all this stuff. They're not paying for me to pimp out their products. Okay, so don't worry, Twitch and YouTubers, but it's collaborative as well. So it's like a Google Docs, but people can log in and view these things on the fly and update everything. It's like an infinite size. So you can keep building and building and growing it. So you can put things like documents inside of it. It can get pretty wieldy. But I've actually used it to great effect for diagramming on the cheap. As long as stylus helps, but it does have the ability to draw those things. But
Yeah,
yeah,
if you got people working from home, or if you got people in other offices, by all means use a shared whiteboard. But just my experience has always been there's nothing easier than just grabbing a pen and starting to write.
right, yeah. Yeah, the Leviathan, when I sent you there, the blog on threat modeling, my friend Dr. Cowan, actually, that was his. So for I'll post it up in here too. But it got the whiteboard that he is doing his threat model on, that you see in the blog post from the Leviathan, is actually sitting next to his desk in his office. But it's a crude example, but it's exactly what you suggested. So when you said, "Oh yeah, just sit down with a whiteboard," I started laughing because I was like, "Oh, that's exactly what Crispin was doing." He's like, "Sit down and start mapping out where everything is." And his thing was he kept adding like different roles. So different roles in an architecture diagram. A regular user will use it this way, and there's a different data flow for that, and different functionality may be had from different orgs. So depending on what kind of system it is, if it's an entire platform or if it's an application, you're gonna need to tailor those things accordingly. Which we didn't get to, but we definitely should maybe schedule something else in the future to talk about different the differences between like a device threat model versus an app threat model versus a platform threat model versus an enterprise threat model, because they're all different, and they can get just as wieldy. Even though app feels like it might be very microcosm of the enterprise, it has its own quantum world as well, where it's little pieces inside of it and a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, when it comes to the apps, they are deceptively large threat models. I mean, even when you get the blanking out of the essentially the compiled web apps,
Yeah.
and there are companies that look at those and say, well, it's just this little tiny thing, and it just has this little bit of functionality. And I'm like, yeah, but it's connecting to your web server that has all that other functionality,
Right.
And because it doesn't have any limits on its own, it can throw whatever API stuff at your web server, and
Yep.
you don't have any local control. Now, that's not to say that an attacker isn't going to spoof it and throw whatever they want to at it anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
you're relying on your server side control, which you should have.
Right.
If it's supposed to be an integer coming in, make sure it's an integer before you pass it on to the application code.
Right. Right. And plus, you have 800 modules that you've called in your Python script there for your fancy, web app thing. So, your threat model can include things like, library dependencies and, build information, SBOM related items as part of your threat model. And it's like, oh, we've got Huawei stuff in here. Okay, you shouldn't have the Huawei stuff. You're going to have to rip that out. So,
yeah. I laugh every time I go to install like one little Python thing, and it's just like, great, you need these 73 other modules. I'm like, oh, that's why. I'm installing a 300K Python thing. Why do I need all these modules?
You're installing an operating system to run a script. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I'd love to keep talking to you. It's 10:15 your time, and I know that you've got, I'm glad you were able to put your family to bed before you came on with me. But and I'm sorry, Mr. Betcher and Miss Berlin couldn't make it, because I know they'd love to have seen you. So, what's the name of your company again?
So my company name is Illuminus, ILLUMINUS, and you can reach my website at illuminus.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn.
I've posted that in our chat a couple times.
Thank you, sir.
Illuminus.com. Illuminating the dark corners of your network.
Indeed.
Do you have a tool? Because usually people have tools.
I don't have anything that I've written myself.
That's good.
Aside from a few handy scripts here and there, but
nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. So, cool. And yeah, are you going to be speaking or attending any conferences in the near future?
For reasons, attending conferences is tricky for me. I do occasionally put out feelers for doing talks. I don't have anything on the schedule at this point, but I'll let you know if anything comes up.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. So you can find Jarrod on his LinkedIn profile, which you can just go look for Jarrod Frates, JARRODFRATES. He's not hard to find. I posted him up in our LinkedIn chat. So that was awesome. So Miss Berlin, of course, is not here, but she's a big fan of I wore that shirt earlier today. So she's a Mental Health Hackers member and founder, and she is on Twitter at InfoSister, INFOSYSTIR, and you can find her on LinkedIn as well. She's doing a lot of posts for Blue Mirror over there. Mr. Betcher, you can find him at Betcherpwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. And you can join our Discord if you go to discord.gg/Discord. Wait. It's been a long day for me. Discord. I can't even type. Discord. There we go. Discord.gg/breaksec. That's our invite to our Discord. And we have a lot of people on there, a lot of good discussion going on over there. I can be found at Brian Brake on Twitter, and you can find me. I'm Brian Brake on LinkedIn, so I'm not hard to find. And we're a proud sponsor of B-Side San Diego. So we're a bronze sponsor. We're going to be at B-Side San Diego, we're being me. I'm also going to be gooning at that, so I'll be running security for that as well. Not running it, I'll be helping with security at the event. But we're a proud sponsor of that, and it's thanks to you, listeners, Patreon supporters, Twitch followers, everybody. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for helping B-Sides, the America's Finest B-Sides is what they call themselves. So y'all got B-Sides Dallas, right? B-Sides Dallas and Austin and San Antonio.
There's B-Sides DFW, DFW. And that's usually the first weekend in November.
Okay. And do you still have B-Sides Fort Worth? Don't they have one as well?
I don't think so. I could be wrong. I tend to kind of stick in my own neighborhood over here, but B-Sides DFW is usually November. I haven't gotten down to B-Sides Austin, and I think they're coming up in a few months. I think they're usually springish.
B-Sides Austin. B-Sides Austin. Oh, I don't see Oh, no, not Sides Austin. B-Sides Austin. There we go. Sides Austin gave me all barbecue stuff, and I was like, what the hell?
Well, that's not bad.
It says December 5th and 6th. Wow. So they moved it. Wowzers.
I could be wrong. Yeah. Maybe they're normally December. I was thinking that they were usually in the spring.
Yeah, no, they just had theirs in December. Yeah, they had theirs in December, so they've got another whole 10 months. Wow.
Okay.
Crazy. Anyway. Well, Jarrod, it was great to see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're able to take time. And if folks need a security review or some architecture review or an audit of their hospital or K-12 education center, hit up Jarrod, and he'll get you set straight, or he'll give you a 500-page document that you won't use, and he'll come back next year and just change the date. Anyway, so
it's not going to be 500 pages. I think the longest one I've ever written is 60 pages.
I'm sorry. Yes, lengthy reports are not good. Yeah, you want
usually they're in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 pages. That's
good. That's awesome. All right, very nice. Well, that's it for breaking down our BreakSec podcast, BreakSec Ed, BreakSec Twitch stream. Hope everyone had a good time. Thank you to everybody who showed up. Catherine, thank you so much for letting us know about the stream. I'll put the more complete stream up later. Cybercoster on Twitch, Digital Warhead, some of the other regulars. So appreciate y'all for coming. So
hello to the regulars. Goodbye to the regulars.
Well, Jarrod, you can, if you want to come on our Tuesday or Friday streams, you're more than welcome to, come on and, talk. I'll try to, hit the YouTube chat a little more often, because sometimes I'll see them after you've streamed. I'm like, after I'm sure, I'm like, oh man, okay, sorry, man, sorry.
I'm usually cooking dinner for the kids, so.
Okay.
But we'll figure something out.
Right on. All right, well, that's it for the the show this week. Take care, stay warm, stay safe. Reach out if you need some help. And as we're fond of saying here, take care of yourself because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye, y'all.